Welcome, Christian Metal Community. Today we're here with Glenn Remsen. Did I pronounce that correctly?
You did. You got it right, Jimmy. Thank you.
Awesome. So Glenn, he runs Lithsocry, which has a lot of different types of ministries under this, and we'll get into that. So we're glad to have you on. So where are you located, Glenn?
I am located in Columbia, South Carolina, the capital of the great Palmetto State.
That's right. You're only about an hour and a half from me, so that's awesome.
That's right.
That's
Yeah.
fun.
So, well, Glenn, tell us, did you grow up in a spiritual or a home or a religious home?
It was spiritual. I wouldn't say not like you would find in South Carolina or in Kentucky, for that matter, Jay.
Right.
I grew up in Connecticut, so the house that I grew up in, we were traditional Episcopal. That's what I
Okay.
grew up. I grew up Episcopalian. We were pretty regular with church. I served as an altar boy and eventually became licensed as a chalice bearer for
Oh,
communion,
wow.
which was a pretty big deal. And I really, it's kind of funny because when I was growing up, I was literally allergic to church.
Yeah.
The mold in the church was just permeating. It was that sweet must smell when you go into a building. And I had asthma and allergies growing up, so it would trigger my asthma and
Oh my God.
allergies. So, yeah, yeah.
Did
So
they
for
think you had a demon when you walked in? And you started, wow.
yeah, and it was a very traditional. I mean, it was very traditional.
Hmm.
It was almost Catholic. We had the
Right.
incense, and we did chant. We chanted, and I was fascinated with that.
Hmm.
Very fascinating form of music, and I enjoyed that. But I remember growing up, like when I was in my middle school to high school years, doing the chalice bearing and the serving in the church. I was like, "There's got to be more to this." There's got to be more to this because I'd hear about Jesus and I was fascinated with the scriptures, and I was exempted from when I was able to go to church because I wasn't allergic to it anymore. I was exempted from going to Sunday school with my peers because the priest was like, "You've got a little bit of a more deep understanding of this than your peers, and I want you in the services so you can listen to my sermons." I was like, "Okay, that's cool." And while I was growing up, my mom, she looked at me one day and she's like, you might want to think about being a priest when you grow up. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that because I got enough problems of my own and I really don't want to deal with other people's problems.
Right.
Right.
So uh, there was definitely a calling there. And in growing up, I would ask my mom questions. I'd be like, why are we not Jewish like my friends down the street? Because very strong Jewish community in the town
Okay.
that I grew up in. Went to some awesome bar mitzvahs growing up. I mean, those are some fun. I mean,
Oh,
you talk
yeah.
about party. That's party. Um, and heaven and hell, that was a question that I always had of how do you prevent yourself from going to hell and go to heaven instead? And those are things that I really kind of had to search out on my own. But, even growing up, um, I had angelic encounters growing up. I
Okay.
had
Hmm.
demonic encounters growing up.
Sweet.
And those are some things that I talk about in a book that I wrote that we can talk about later.
Okay.
All right. Cool. So, did you grow up in a musical home?
Yes, I did. Music was everywhere in my house.
Oh, wow.
Growing up we were real close to New York City. So arts and entertainment was a really big deal. My uncle was actually in a rock band. Well, it was like a 60s rock band, and the
Right.
name of the group was the Steeple People, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, one of the members of his band was one of the Rockettes from Radio City Music Hall. I think it was Fern
All right.
Fitzgerald, and she eventually wound up on television. She was like, I think on Dallas a few times and Silver Spoons in the '80s. So
Oh,
Okay.
wow.
that was a big deal. But my uncle Rich, and my mom, music was such a big thing. My uncle Rich, he and my mom were big fans of ABBA in the day, the '70s and the
Yeah.
'80s. Yeah, my dad was into Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons. They had the records, and even when I was younger, my mom would buy me like those K-Tel compilation albums to listen to that had Queen on it, and oh man, Billy Joel and
Yeah.
all that stuff. And I was just, I loved the music growing up, and they made me start to take piano lessons when I was in third grade, and I really wanted to play baseball instead. But that's really what I wanted to do. I wanted to be like Bucky Dent on the New York Yankees and play shortstop for
There
the
you go.
Yankees. That really was not my forte. So I did the piano, and as I did piano, I started to enjoy it more, and I learned a lot. And that was at the time of the synthesizer revolution in the early '80s in music. So I wanted every synthesizer. Some of my heroes were Howard Jones growing up, and Nick Rhodes from Duran Duran. And
Oh, wow.
really, I just had the privilege of interviewing Stuart Neal from Kaja Gugu, who is like an innovator in
That's so
80s
cool.
keyboard. Yeah.
Yeah, and you
So-
said he's a believer now, right?
Yes, he is. Yeah, he
Yeah.
leads Messianic Praise, and
Okay.
I interviewed him just a few weeks ago, and I did not know this, but on their in their later iterations of albums, they had songs "Forgiveness" and "The Lion's Mouth," and I asked him, I was like, "Were these biblically based?" He's like, "Oh, yes, they were," because Nick, the bass player, had just gotten saved not too long after "Too Shy" came out. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah, God was doing stuff there. I'm like, oh, wow, that is so cool to know.
So-
It was so neat to talk to him and find out kind of behind the scenes and
Yeah.
talk to him about his faith and how he came to Jesus.
So, a Messianic Praise, is that a band or that's
It's a form of music. It's
Okay.
basically Hebrew centric.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
nice? Well, Jay's his primary instrument is the keys too, right? So he can relate
Awesome.
to that. Yeah.
I
What?
don't remember how to play the piano at all.
Oh,
Yeah, it's funny. Just as a side note, I hated piano lessons.
Yeah.
I was the worst at piano. It really, literally took me in high school, like finding some music that I loved
Okay.
and wanting to learn it on the piano by ear. That's
How,
where
how
it
old
started.
how old were you when you started learning, Jay?
Oh God, see, I was about 4.
Oh, wow.
I remember
Oh,
I had
wow.
my first piano lessons about 4.
And who are some of your inspirational artists for piano and
Man,
keys?
you know what? Actually, Michael W. Smith,
Okay.
Walter Hawkins, Andre Crouch.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that's
Oh,
the
yeah.
kind of stuff I grew up listening to. I mean, anything Michael W. Smith was producing, of course, like Amy Grant, or Brian Duncan. That was another one. Brian Duncan's Sweet Comfort Band. So I know you might remember some of that. I mean, God, so many great, second chapter of Acts, Matthew
Yep.
Ward, growing up in the '80s, how old are you? Like,
I am a little over half a century old. So.
okay, cool. So yeah, so you
53,
you know
yeah.
you know exactly. I feel you. And so we all, saying over 40, basically.
Yeah,
So,
yep, over 40. Yeah.
right. So we
And
definitely,
I think we were blessed to be able to enjoy in the 80s and I'd say the early 90s some really great music and musicians.
Yeah, you mentioned Matthew Ward. I actually saw him 2 years ago. He was at Immortal Fest, which was
wow. You know what?
an odd fit, but they did have him and Amy Grant's first husband, I think. What was his
Gary
name?
Chapman? Talking about,
Yeah, Gary Chapman.
yeah.
Yeah.
So the Brave was supposed to play. The drummer he drums for a famous country musician. I can't remember who it was. But because of the tour, they had to cancel. And then so they filled that slot with those two. And I was like, well, that's an odd choice. But a lot of the older people did enjoy it.
Matthew, man, back in the day, his voice was,
Oh, for real?
man.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
man, dude. So, as far as I guess, what you described so far, I mean, having a podcast, showcasing music was a no-brainer.
Yeah, it was. And there's a little bit of a history behind that. One of the things, okay, so growing up, the first thing I wanted to be was a farmer because I grew up in the middle of a dairy farm. I mean,
Wow.
the tractors and all that stuff. Oh,
Yeah.
man, that's so cool. Second thing I wanted to be was an astronaut because Star Wars was just like, I want to fly
Sure.
the Millennium Falcon.
There you go.
Yep. Then, as I started to mature, when I hit about sixth grade, I was like, I want to be a radio DJ, and I was fascinated with radio.
Wow.
That's what I wanted to do. I remember the radio station in Connecticut that I listened to was the rock station, I-95 FM. We'd drive by all the time, and at night when they'd have the lights on, I'd try to look to see, oh man, is Ethan Carey in there? I knew the DJs by name, I knew their schedule, and I knew what they were doing. I was like, that's what I want to do. And then you may remember this, you may not, and it just went off the air not too long ago. It was a show that was broadcast coast to coast on Saturday and Sunday nights called Open House Party, hosted by John Garabedian. Mm-hmm. And he would bring different artists on and interview them, and it'd go on from like 7 to midnight on Saturday to Sunday night. And you could call in from all over the country and request songs, and you'd find out what was going on in Kentucky or Tennessee. And I was like, whoa, this is so cool. And he was doing it from the basement of his house. I was like, that is even cooler. Okay.
Yeah.
So the whole idea of being able to touch the world through, maybe a small room in my house was kind of neat. I did have the opportunity in 2001, just several days after 9/11, to start producing and co-hosting a radio talk show on News Talk 1250 WTMA in Charleston, South Carolina. God opened up for a door for that. Wasn't music focused. It was just, spiritual talk radio. And I did a television show, Arise and Shine, in Charleston as well for several years. I was the local cable access TV cable guy, basically, at the time. So the podcast, the music of the podcast, I was working for a college in South Carolina in the admissions office, and this whole idea of podcasting started, and I was like, okay, that's what I want to do, and let's do this, for recruiting purposes. And it was during that time, it was focused on the college, but I had to find music that was royalty free, that we wouldn't get sued for using.
Yeah.
And I started to come across artists that were independent. I was like, whoa, this is good. Whoa, this is good. We got to use this. Eventually led me to actually meeting one of the artists that we featured their music. She came to Charleston, got on the podcast with me for the college, and did a concert. It was the first concert I ever put on back in 2008, 2009. I can't remember. It was sometime around then. So then with this was an absolute no-brainer. I was like, we're combining my passion for communications with my passion for music. This is
100%,
where we're going to go. Yeah.
That's awesome. So on your website, lithsocry.com, it says prophetic arts and source for alt Christian music. Mm-hmm. So what is Lithsocry, and what does that mean?
Sure. Lithsocry is taken from Luke chapter 19 at verse 40. When we read of the triumphal of Jesus into the city of Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, where everybody's going wild. I mean, it is just loud. They're cheering. He's the King of Kings. Mm-hmm. And then you got some Pharisees that were in the crowd that came out and said to Jesus, hey, can you quiet these people down? They're a little loud. And Jesus said, if these become silent, the very rocks will cry out. Mm-hmm. So I've always, for a good while, I've been fascinated with that verse, that the rocks would cry out. And the word rock in Greek is lithos. So the name of the ministry itself came from the concept. Well, Jesus saying that if my people don't cry out and praise me, the very rocks will. And that's one of the things that I've been hearing and have heard in secular rock, secular metal, that there's oftentimes they are praising the Lord. They are giving the Lord honor, or they're crying out for salvation. The rocks are crying out because a lot of his people have become very religious and very silent. So what I did is I took the Greek word lithos and added it to the English word cry to make lithos cry. I used it. I initially wanted to use it as just my pen name for a book that I was writing at the time, because I didn't want to use my real name for the book. But then the Lord was like, no, use your real name. I was like, okay, we'll go ahead and do that. Now, what's interesting is that when I chose that name for the ministry, nobody was using it. Nobody heard of it. It wasn't even a word. But I just found on YouTube the other day, there's now this new form of witchcraft called lithoscrying, where you isolate yourself out in the middle of a cave and listen to what the rocks say. So I'm like, okay, that's really interesting.
Whoa,
it just goes to show how Satan tries to steal everything. It's like, no, that's not what it's about.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting that you talk about that. When you were saying that, it just reminded me of Rosetta Tharpe, who, of course, is the godmother of rock and roll, which by default means that she's also the godmother of Christian rock and roll.
Yes.
Because her songs were Christian songs. Well, her first song ever was called Rock Me.
Yes. Yep.
And it was about, Jesus bringing salvation to somebody that's dying, basically.
Yes. A lot of people forget that rock and roll and all of you can take a look at the family tree of rock and roll. It all has its roots in gospel music.
Yep.
That's where it came from. I was like, wow, this is very interesting. And Sister Rosetta Tharpe is the perfect example of, this is where this all came from. So that's why I get I just find it very amusing sometimes when people are like, oh, yeah, rock and roll is the devil's music.
Right,
no,
exactly.
It came from gospel. Please, let's be educated about this. Let's do some music history and music research.
Yes, I agree. Being educated, we actually have a whole timeline that starts with Sister Rosetta Tharpe on the ChristianMetalGroup.com and kind of goes through the history of Christian rock and metal. So that's awesome.
Actually, if we really want to go back, the history of Christian rock and metal goes back to the time of the prophet Habakkuk.
Yeah, there we go.
Now we're going way back.
Okay, we're going way, way back, and this blew my mind because when you take a look, it's his prayer in the last chapter of the book of Habakkuk that's recorded. It says this played upon the Shigionoth, right, and that's in the King James. And so, what is a Shigionoth? And your more conservative teachers will be like, well, that was a type of musical instrument back in the day. Mm-hmm. Well, no, it wasn't. What it was a form of music. It was a genre, and it was a wild Dionysian rant. So when Habakkuk prayed that prayer, and it's a form of music, he did it in the form of a wild Dionysian rant, which is very similar to what you hear in metal.
Oh, wow.
Nice.
Very interesting. So you got the Lithsocry, you got that up and running. Was that the podcast immediately, or that come a little bit later? How did that get started?
Yeah, that came a little bit later. What started first is, and here's the book. I'll put it in front of the camera.
Okay.
So you can see it.
I'm going to have to order a copy of that. Awesome.
Absolutely, yeah. You can get it on our website at lithoscry.com, lithoscry.com. It is entitled Stones That Cry God's Precious Metal. And what I did in the book is I started chronicling, and it meant a lot to me to write this book because I had been... I'm a brain tumor survivor. A lot of people don't know that.
No.
And it was during the healing process from the brain. Well, I had kind of like the trifecta of disaster in my life, like within about 2 or 3 years all at once.
Uh-huh.
I had left a Christian cult, that I had been in for 13 years. I thought it was a legitimate church until I started getting higher and higher up in position. And I'm like, wait a minute. No wonder this is all messed up. This is not good.
All right, I'm going to let you finish, but we need to dive into that a little more.
Yeah,
right,
we'll dive into that a little bit.
This is something Jay and I, we're very interested in this type of thing. So
yeah, for sure.
So then I had a pituitary tumor, brain tumor removed.
Okay.
And then several months after that, my wife at the time left me and took the kids. So
oh, wow.
So I was a little bit confused.
That's called testing your faith a little bit, right?
It was. I would have to say
sure.
I'm not very proud of the way that I lived during that time.
Well, sure, but we're also on a journey, and that's part of our journey,
Yes.
right?
Exactly. But it was during that time, God, it was not for waste, because during that time, really up until that time, I was so proud of myself that because I was a Christian and I had been a pastor and I had all of these ministries, that I didn't listen to rock and roll at all.
Mm.
Okay, I even preached against heavy metal and rock and roll. I have some of
Wow.
my earlier writings, which will remain in a box in the closet. We're not going to pull those back out again. It was during that time of humbling that I was like, wait a minute, there's something different here. We've been kind of missing. I've been kind of missing the boat. And during that time of healing, I started listening to the Effect Radio 88.1 in Charleston out of Calvary Chapel, and I was hearing music from Skillet and all these other bands, and I was like, whoa, wait a minute. I was like, I feel better with this harder, heavier music.
Yeah.
And then I did what most pastors would say would be the slippery slope is headed over to the secular rock
Oh
station. And I
boy.
was like, oh wow. I was like, I feel even better listening to this. But what was really strange is that there were some very specific bands during that healing process that were not Christian bands that I could hear God speaking to me very, very clearly. I had a hard time picking up the Bible because of the experiences in the church that I was in, or the cult that I was in, because it had that taint. I could still hear that pastor's voice as I was reading the Bible. So God was still reaching and working to me. So in the book, back to the book, as I write about my journey with my struggle with Christian rock, not Christian rock, but rock and roll and faith, even as a child. You remember the days when they had that pastor would come around and talk about the evils of rock and roll and all the devil pictures
Yeah.
on album covers and
Oh, I
scare
went to one of
everybody.
them. I remember them talking about Blue Ulster Cult.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep. So I struggled with that. So what the book does is it goes through my journey of that through the tumor to really getting down to a biblical explanation of why all rock is and metal is not of the devil, and it's actually, since all things were created by God, it's an art form that the devil stole, and we
Mm.
need to reclaim it and take it back.
Yep. So that's how the podcast Raven's Heart was
Yes,
birthed out of that. So then I'm assuming so then that you progressed into a musical festival, right? Is that kind of how that
yes,
happened?
I
Yes.
did. It happened because I said I'd never do it again. So, yeah, circle back to 2009. I think it was 2009. When I brought a young artist in from New York. Her name's Michelle Hotelling. She's the young lady that I met through doing the podcast at the Citadel, and I was like, hey, I want to have you come down and do a live show. Well, what I needed for that is I needed like $750 to make it work. Okay.
Oh wow.
I needed like money for the plane ticket for her and her producer, and I needed to get a keyboard.
Mm.
All right. And looking back at it, man, I worked so hard to get that $750 to make that work. And I was like, man, we're going to make this work. This is going to be awesome. And it was a very simple setup. And then, of course, making sure she had the accommodations when she came into Charleston, and her producer, and that we had everything taken care of, taking out for meals and everything like that. And after I got done, I was like, wow, that was an awesome experience, but I'm never going to do that again.
It was a great learning experience, though, right?
It was a great learning experience, but I was so stressed out over getting
Yeah.
$750. So as I was doing the podcast, meeting all of these great bands and artists, I was like, okay, God started stirring in me again. Let's do a music festival. And I was like, okay. And my friend Ziggy, who's a great artist, Christian rock artist, he's now with Suffering Gift down in Charleston. He called me up. He's like, hey, let's see if we can do a show together, get a show in Charleston. I was like, all right, we'll do that. And this was in 2019. Yeah, it was in 2019. It was the fall of 2019 when we started talking about this. So we started putting things together, and we were going to have Disciple come. That was what we were going to do. But we had gone from me needing $750 to do a show to something of the tune of about $11,000 to
No,
something that I
not
said.
that, you know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, not
Yeah.
a big deal. So for me, it was really, really a stretch of faith. And when we had originally planned the first Rock Fest, it was going to be Disciple, Ziggy, and Filthy Rags was another band
Oh,
out
wow.
of Indiana. It was going to be 3 bands, but of course, because of COVID, we had to put everything to a halt. Now, what's really interesting is just before we put everything to a halt in 2020, a friend of mine, he had a podcast up in North Carolina, Revelation Resistance, Stacy Fannin, and he was working with us. That's how it became Get Revelation Rockfest. His podcast was Revelation Resistance, and he had prophesied on his podcast that Rockfest was going to be bigger than I ever imagined. And here we are just getting ready to roll into COVID. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. So the Lord had given me some very clear instructions on how to prepare for when COVID was over. And we were one of the first live events in Charleston after the social distancing and the outdoor event ban was lifted. So we were ready to roll. So it had gone from 3 bands to like 10 bands because everybody was looking for a place to play. And we had Zana come in out of Texas. We had 2 bands out of Texas. We had The Letter Black come from Pennsylvania. We had bands from Florida. I mean, it was just absolutely amazing. Tennessee as well. So it was really neat because it had gone from what I had envisioned of three bands, and God just completely expanded it to, I believe, if I remember correctly, it was 9 bands the first year. And of course, after we did it for the first year, it's like, oh man, we're going to do that again. And this is what I learned about music festivals or Christian music festivals. They're not easy. Okay, none of it is easy to do. It has to be completely directed of the Lord. And the reason why we were doing it was when you look in Scripture, musical instruments in the Old Testament, the Hebrew word for a musical instrument, especially a stringed instrument, is kili. And translated, that literally means artillery. So the reason why we were moving forward with this is we wanted to break the religious chains in Charleston with some heavy artillery. And we wanted to break the religious hold over the city. For anybody that's familiar with Charleston, it's referred to as the Holy City because of all of the church steeples that are in it.
Nice.
Well, let's put it this way. Charleston's, and has been, but it's changing, has been historically very religious. I mean, George Whitefield, one of the greatest preachers of the gospel, was excommunicated from the Anglican Church in Charleston for preaching heresy. When he was preaching the gospel, ye must be born again. He wasn't preaching the party line at the time. So the reason why we did that and why we continued with it was for warfare. It was a form of spiritual warfare. And I'll tell you what, I mean, my goodness, during the whole 3 years that we did it, there was intense spiritual warfare going on. As a matter of fact, I've got a picture from the second year that we did it when Warriors of Light was on stage, and you look in the smoke from the smoke machine, you can see the face of a demon behind Laura Victoria. The first year we were doing deliverance on a young lady while the show was going on. Okay, we were doing deliverance, trying to cast out a devil, and all the sound system went down while we were doing that. So we were dealing with all of these different things. So from a aspect of spiritual warfare, that's what we were using the event for, was to break the atmosphere and to drive the demonic back. The last year that we did it in 2023, 2023, it was bittersweet. The festival had built up, but I was getting ready to move to Columbia 5 days after the festival, actually 7 days after the festival. And I knew that the Lord had said, okay, you've done your job here. It's time to take a break for 3 years and to move, and then we'll reestablish and redo again in the future. So this is one thing that I've learned, and that I'd like for people to understand. I am not a music festival or concert promoter. That's not what I am. I am a minister of the gospel, and our goal and my goal is always to create a stage for Jesus. And in doing the festivals, the ministry opportunities that opened up with the artists that we were working with, and there's still a lot of them that I am in touch with quite frequently, and I'm still ministering to them. And that's what it's about. It's about the ministry. And man, our goal is that as those chains were broken in Charleston, we were breaking through the atmosphere there, that people would be saved and born again. Because that's really what, you can have all the podcasts in the world, you can have all the festivals in the world.
Right.
It doesn't matter what genre of music is. What it comes down to is snatching souls out of hell. That's what it comes down to.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Yeah. So, as far as rock and metal have like a lot of different subgenres. So, what is your preferred like subgenre of either or both to just kind of listen to, or even to promote on the show?
Sure. Yeah, as a matter of fact, my favorite subgenre is symphonic metal.
Okay.
That is really my wheelhouse, and that comes from that. And I've done a few episodes on this, and I've actually talked about it. When you listen to secular symphonic metal bands, they really venture and veer into the spiritual realm very quickly, and in a way that's not offensive or demonic, but even to the point where they've ventured into that realm so far where Holy Spirit will start working through them in a lot of their music. In addition to piano, when I was in grade school, I eventually took up the trombone as well and had the opportunity to play. Once I got selected to play in the All-State Symphony Orchestra, and I got to experience being with when you've got the strings with you and you've got all of those different instruments working together. I'll never forget sitting in the trombone section, feeling the sound of the strings move through the floors and through the floor and move through my feet. It's an experience I'll never forget. So when you have all those aspects, and I do have a great appreciation for classical music as well. I love, especially the Romantic era of classical music, 19th century, Tchaikovsky, all of those artists from that point in time. So it's the symphonic metal realm that I venture to, and that's where I prefer now. I also really do enjoy power metal. Yeah. I enjoy progressive metal, and people may find it shocking that I also like some good EDM music. I really do like that. Some of those artists, some trance, some house. I like that, and I even like going back to the '60s and '70s and listening to the music from then. But really, that's where I stay. Is in that my mainstay is, if you looked at my record collection and my albums on the racks, most of them are symphonic metal.
Are you a Shaquille O'Neal EDM fan? He's in that scene and all. So
he is in that scene. Yeah, but he is.
I remember one of the first I heard was the S&M by Metallica. I thought that was a great album.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I love whenever Extol brought in violins and stuff. You're into that kind of thing? Yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, symphonic. I have a semi-classical background. I played violin for 8 years, and
nice.
Nice.
I have yet to do a really big string arrangement for the metal music I've been writing, but it's coming very soon. Actually, the next song I'm working on would be
nice
elements.
I think Jay plays 14 and a half instruments or something.
Yeah, no
right.
kidding. Very, very talented.
Right. The half instrument is definitely guitar.
It's funny because when I played trombone all the way up until my senior year of high school, and then
Yeah.
I quit to go to military college. And I kind of regret when I see these symphony orchestras behind bands like Epica
Mm-hmm.
and
Oh
Within
yeah, yeah.
Temptation, and I'm like, man, if I had stuck with the trombone, I could be
Mhm.
on stage jamming with Epica and Within
Yeah,
Temptation.
How
exactly.
did you not end up in a ska band though?
That's a really good question because I did play a little bit of jazz as well
Yeah, it's not too
on the
late though.
trombone.
Yeah, jazz is probably my foundation for sure.
Yeah.
Jazz and metal. But yeah, like um, what's crazy is I've done a lot of like string arrangements in other genres.
Okay.
Just
I
not.
find jazz very spiritual as well.
Oh, absolutely. It was. I was
Very
literally
spiritual.
just looking at something about John Coltrane before we started this interview.
Oh
Yeah.
wow, he's got some good stuff. Also, along those lines, I saw Apocalyptica.
Oh
Are
yeah,
Yes.
you a fan of
absolutely.
them?
Oh yeah. Uh huh.
They
Yep.
actually put on a really good show for what for what they are. It was a lot of fun.
I know. What
That
about
is
Flesh
neat.
God Apocalypse? You ever heard of them?
Yes,
Mm-mm,
I have. Yep.
I
Hmm.
don't know them.
Yeah,
Yep.
they're really good. They have some, maybe subject wise, maybe a little bit. They're somewhere between like maybe Apocalyptica and God, what's the name of the other group I was thinking about? Damu Borgia or something.
Yes. Yep. Yep. Very
They
familiar with him. Yep.
unfortunately, I mean, it will be great when we see the normalization of, I would say, symphonic metal among Christians. And I think when it comes to like stuff like a festival, I can't think of a Christian festival out there. It's like, oh yeah, we can actually afford to bring symphonic metal bands in.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it's so expensive. I'm
It
sure.
is. It
So
is.
so Glenn, and your time of being your own radio host here with your podcast and all in that space, what's been some of your favorite interviews of bands and other people? Because I've noticed, I have been listening to your podcast quite a bit, and I love that you're very diverse, and you bring in theologians, you talk about aliens. Of course, you cover mostly music, but you
Hmm.
do have other topics. So, what's been some of your favorite, and what's been some of the most fun?
Some of the most fun interviews that because I've been at this now for 6 years, so it's like, oh my goodness, you go back in the catalog of the interviews that you do. I'd have to say probably some of the ones that I've been most honored to do, of course, is Stuart Neal from Kajagoogoo that I just recently released on on the music side. I had the honor and privilege a year ago of having two powerhouses in one season. I had Les Carlson from Bloodgood to listen and to be able
Yeah.
to talk to one of the what I would consider founders of the Christian rock and Christian metal, the whole
Yeah.
genre,
Just the
and
most humble guy too. I got to meet him at Immortal Fest and all. He's so like he's the real deal. He's
he
good.
is. He is totally, totally the real deal, and the wisdom that he just imparted, and the love that he has for Jesus and people. It's like, okay, you listen to him talk, and you're like, all of that ridiculousness about rock musicians and metal musicians. It just goes, it just melts away when you hear that because you hear Jesus coming through his words.
Yeah.
Then another individual, his music played a huge role in my life during the healing process. Man by the name of Justin Ellswick. He goes by Sleep Thief, and he
Okay.
does atmospheric type music.
Hmm.
Very profound. He and I are very similar in the ways that we grew up and interests in music and everything like that. So it was just really neat to be able to. It's been neat to talk to people that have had an impact on my life. Now, the interesting ones where I started to get into having the theologians was the interview that I did with the late Dr. Michael Heiser, who did a lot of research on aliens, demons, wrote the whole book, The Unseen Realm. And if I can draw a nexus to somehow, because my core is always the core of music and art is metal. I mean, I can't not there's got to be a nexus somewhere. So I noticed that he was writing books and talking about all the things that are addressed in a lot of metal songs. I mean, so yeah. And I reached out to him just before he was diagnosed with the stomach cancer, and I reached out. I was like, "Hey, this is going to be very interesting to you. I do basically a podcast that focuses on music, especially metal, and I'd like to talk about a lot of the things that are addressed in these metal songs. I mean, just listen to a Ronnie James Dio song or look at one of his album
Right, right.
covers. I mean, let's talk about this. He's like, yeah, I'm very interested in doing this, and let's go ahead and do it. Well, the interview that interview is what started our channel to get noticed, because up until then I was just kind of, we'd get a couple viewers here and there and, a couple subscribers here and there. But what was interesting about it, and this just goes to show how it's all God, and a lot of people are like, well, what are these steps that I need to do to grow my YouTube channel? Just be obedient to what the Lord says to do, and he'll grow it in due time. It's like planting seeds. But with Dr. Heiser, he was not feeling well with stomach cancer. He was diagnosed shortly after. I did the whole interview with COVID. I was sitting there doing the interview with COVID-19 and felt like total trash. And we had audio problems that were just insane during the whole podcast. So I did it live, and we had, kind of the normal viewership. And I was like, this audio is just trash. I was like, I got to do something with it. So I took it down. I unlisted it, and then went back and fixed the audio the best that I could. And so I reloaded it like on a Friday night before I went to bed. Okay. And I was watching the count. I was like, okay, 15 views. I'm going to go to bed. We'll probably get up around 75. I wake up the next morning and it's got like 1,500 views and climbing. And I was like, this is the worst quality interview I've ever done. I felt like trash. I don't even remember really most of what I said because I didn't feel well, and he wasn't feeling well. And that video is still getting like maybe between 70 to 80 views a day. And It's my worst video I've ever done. So it just goes to show that it's got nothing to do with me. It's got nothing to do with the quality of the podcast. What it's got to do with is what the Lord wants and what he wants people to understand and to know. I've also done interviews with Dr. Richard Blackaby, who wrote the Experiencing God series. Dallas Jenkins, the director of the Chosen series, has been on with me. Really enjoyed the time that we spent together doing that interview. And I've even had Marshall Terrell, who wrote the Jesus Music book that accompanies the movie, the documentary, The Jesus Music. So, yeah, and we talk about aliens, we talk about the Loch Ness Monster, talk about UFOs. And you know what? That's all the things. People who are into metal have inquisitive minds.
True.
And they're looking for the beyond. And for me, those are things that I'm all interested in. And that's why I really kind of geared the podcast more towards just being a metal podcast to prophetic arts. We're going to talk about people that do art, various art forms, theologians, authors. I've had several authors on as well. So several, probably one of the most interesting interviews that I've done is with Yvette from the band Lichens out of Mexico. Actually, no, it's not Mexico. I forget which. This was a couple of years ago, but I had to have a translator while we did the entire show.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, it worked, but it was
for in case you don't know about this, anybody that may be interested. I actually listened to a podcast called Haunted Cosmos, and it's about high strangeness of all things, but it's from a biblical worldview. So they always bring it back to that, and that's one. Like I wouldn't just go listen to a show about ghost or whatever, but I'm always interested in I'm learning about cults and different things, but because that specific one is from a biblical worldview, I love it. So
yeah. My she's been very busy. We were doing several episodes on the paranormal, but the musician Alyssa out of Pennsylvania, she would join me as a co-host, and it was really kind of fun because her dad came on when we did the one on UFOs and aliens. We would do like what we would call one of our X-File editions, and her dad came on and talked about a UFO experience that he had when he was younger. And
oh wow,
I was just really blown away that he felt free enough to do that. Very freaky experience that he had. So to be able to have that on there, and we're at the point where we need to, and this is part of the journey with Jesus. The world we live in is more mysterious than we know,
Oh, sure.
or even think. And one of the things that has kind of bothered me, and it kind of goes into the whole metal and rock and roll controversy, is that the Western church. Now, I'm gonna let me start this with a preemption: is that there is only one way of salvation, and that is through Jesus.
Right.
That's it. Okay, there are not multiple paths, and it's by believing upon Jesus to save your sins, save you from your sins. That's it. Okay, that's non-negotiable. But the church in the West has become so narrow-minded in the Western view that demons don't exist today, miracles don't exist today. Oh, if it's a UFO, it's got to be a demon. Let's go back and read what the church fathers wrote on some of this stuff. The church fathers did not necessarily believe that. They actually believed that you cannot limit God in his creation. It's very likely that he might have created other universes and other beings.
Mm-hmm.
But what we do know is that we and all of the creation are the ones that were created in the image of God. Nothing else. My dog was not created in the image of God. The fish in the sea were not created in God's image. The angels were not even created in the image of God. And that's what we have to remember, is that we're a very unique aspect of God's creation. So in doing the podcast, what I've wanted to do is to help people to break those chains of thinking. Because when you have those chains broken and you approach Scripture with an open mind instead of the filter of what you have been taught, maybe perhaps in Sunday school, you start to see a whole lot of things in there. It's like, oh, wow. Well, you know what? You know what it really comes down to, guys? Is just start reading your Bible, okay? Just start reading it. And when you actually read it, it's like, whoa, I did not know that was in there.
Absolutely. Every time. Seems like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially when you grow up in, like, I guess, religions that have extra biblical points of view. Oh my goodness, it's pretty wild, man. Those extra biblical things that pose as biblical Christianity, or or magnify leaders.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
It's pretty wild. It gets wild.
It does get really wild. I actually had on with me a few months ago Kent Hovind, Dr. Dino.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And he's got, there are some things and it was one of the first interviews that I've done where I don't really agree with everything that he said. Okay. So it was kind of a stretch for me. God's really kind of just taking the training wheels off now. Mm-hmm. And I was approached by somebody who's like, hey, would you like to have Dr. Hovind on? I was like, yeah, I mean, we'll go ahead and do it. I believe that this era that we're living in right now, the earth that we're familiar with and everything around it, yes, it was created in 7 literal days. However, when you take a look at the earth and everything else, the earth's probably been around a whole lot longer than 2,000 years. And science and faith are not two things that fight against each other. They really don't oppose each other.
Right.
And I had somebody that's been a long time follower of Lithsocry on the podcast, and they blasted me on Facebook. They're like, well, I don't agree with you. Sounds like some really faulty theology you had, because if the dinosaurs existed before, if they existed before the Adam and Eve and everything was created, there was no sun. And I was like, yeah, if you actually go back and read the scriptures, when God created the heavens and earth, he created light. And he said, let there be light, before the sun was actually created. Mm-hmm. So you have to look at those things. I got a really, and it was really interesting. And then I brought something up about vampires in the Bible. And the Bible does mention vampires in the Old Testament. And man, on TikTok, that thing went like crazy. And the comments were very interesting. And I had all these people like, oh, you're just interpreting it the way that you want to. Oh, it's a figure of speech, blah, blah, blah. I actually had one comment from a young lady. She's like, "Hey, everybody! I just went to Strong's Concordance, and it does say vampire in there, so it is in the scripture."
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Nice.
that is so
Yeah.
funny, man. I um, I think that one of the cool things about creation is that, I mean, if you think about God creating Adam, for example, he probably created Adam. You know, he was a man, so we could say, you know, let's just say the age of 30.
Yeah.
So, you know, God created Adam to be a man that, you know, with the physical build, shape, all that stuff of a man at the age of 30. So
Yes.
why not create rocks the age that would be the age and size of, you know, something that's been around a million years, or whatever else. You know, God creates things how he wants. And like the animals, you know, the way he created them, you know, they first start off, people say, which came first, the chicken or the egg, you know? But the way that, you know, God created things, he created the chickens and then created eggs for them to reproduce. You
Yeah.
know, so I think when people look at the world like that and creation like that, then you know, it can, you know, you can see why somebody might think that things have been around a lot longer. Because of course, God's been around a lot longer, and of
Oh yeah.
course, we don't know how long when God created the heavens and the earth that
We don't.
that it was in that chaos.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yep.
before he said, "Let there be light." But
Yep.
once he said, "Let there be light," and he divided, you know, the day and the night, then he started the 7 day, um,
Yes.
you
Exactly.
know, the week system. But yeah, like I
Yep.
said, I do look at a lot of that, you know, creation versus evolution stuff as God literally created things to be, you know, as they are, like, you know, like as if they've always been there, as if they've matured, you know, they're already mature. So, you know, God didn't create children first and then have them grow up to be adults. He created
That's
adults.
Yeah.
a very good point. I guess I really hadn't thought of it like that
Mm-hmm.
before.
Yep. When you go back and read the book of Genesis
Mm-hmm.
without the Sunday school filter, it's mind blowing.
Mm-hmm.
Because the first thing that blew my mind about the book of Genesis was that God created Adam and then placed him in the garden.
Right.
Okay, so the entire earth was not the Garden of Eden. There
Right.
was this piece of property.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's think about it a little bit more. Eden still exists.
Mm-hmm.
There were two cherubs that were put there to protect it, but we just can't see it because we're fallen now. But it still exists. It's still there. It was never he never destroyed Eden.
Mm-hmm.
It still exists. So there's a whole bunch of things. And then when you get into, okay, you got Adam and Eve and his children, and you know, especially with Cain when he was sent to wander the earth and he had the mark of Cain to protect him from other people. Well, who were the other people that were outside of that? You know, that needed to be protected of. When all we read of, there's just so much there.
Yes,
And
there's so many theories over the
yeah,
years.
so you know,
So many.
and the key to it is we can't be like, well, a lot of pastors and preachers will glaze over those questions.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what's gotten us hemmed up as believers. Is like, well, you don't have the answers for these. Well, we don't, but we have to be open to what those answers are and take a look at Scripture. And we
Mm-hmm.
have to go back and take a look at what did the rabbis write. I mean, my goodness, the ancient rabbis know a whole lot more than we did on a lot of these matters. We have to go back and take a look at it objectively.
Oh
Wow,
yeah, for sure. And I
that's so
think that
cool.
it's also, um, you know, I think another thing, you know, God, like um, who can really phantom God? Who can phantom the infinity? Like,
Nope.
I think that, you know, a lot of questions about like stuff like that. A lot of questions about, you know, even like heaven and hell, or even creation. I think that, you know, God almost has to just say, "Hey, this happened. You have to trust me on this.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly.
I'll show you why you have to trust me on this." And then the rest of it, I mean, we'll live forever at some point, which is something we can't even conceive that, especially bodily, because God
Hmm.
promised to give us new bodies, and it's like it will take forever. That time, just however long, you know, like I said, we can't really conceive of it, but we will still, I'm sure, be learning about God in eternity.
Yes. We have.
So
I mean, He is an
how? Yeah.
eternal, all powerful
Mm-hmm.
being.
Yeah,
Just think about that for a moment, and that'll turn your brain into a pretzel real
right,
fast.
exactly. And it's like,
Yeah.
so how can we as finite beings, even comprehend like everything? So yeah, we'll be asking questions the rest of our lives. I think
I
that
can't even comprehend how my computer works. Okay, I just know I turn on the button, and this is how it works. There's people that can comprehend that. Quantum physics. That's not something that I can comprehend, and we are just at the, thumbnail of understanding our universe.
Mm.
That's one of the things that's bothered me is, and I was this way too, and I'd caution any new believer to stay away from this. Is that, hey, I'm saved now, so I know everything. No, you don't.
oh God,
You
that
don't.
happens so much.
You'll never know it
Because
all. No. Mm-mm.
no. Mm-mm.
Well, let's get into a little bit. Give us an overview of, you said you grew up in kind of a stricter religion, and then you got involved in a cult.
Yeah,
Give us. Let's get into that a little bit and tell us a little bit about that history.
sure. I was actually born again, and God saved me in the cult. So God can do anything He wants. I mean, it was just the way that it happened, the way that things were put together, and I really believe that that happened. The whole experience was necessary for God to make me who I am.
Right.
There's no experience that's wasted at all. I didn't know any better. I came from Connecticut, and I grew up in an Episcopal church, and I went to the church once, and man, I'll tell you what, I knew that I was a sinner. I mean, it was so evident to me. So much so, I didn't want to go back and didn't go back for a week.
Wow.
Or actually, I think it was more like 2 weeks I didn't go back. And it wasn't even anything, it wasn't hard preaching. It really wasn't. Actually, the first sermon was about, that I was there for, that I listened to, was about being swept up on the wings of eagles and having the strength of the Lord. And
Mhm.
I'm getting convicted listening to that. It's like, oh man, I'm a mess. But I didn't want to go back because I didn't want to change, and I knew that I was wrong. I knew that I was a sinner. God had worked some situations in between those 2 weeks where it got to the point where I said to my roommate at the Citadel, who was going there at that time, I was like, I need to go back and I need to be born again. And all that week leading up to that day that I asked Jesus to set me free at the church, I was repenting of things all during the week. I was like, okay, I'm not gonna curse anymore. I'm not gonna swear anymore. We're getting rid of the magazines that I shouldn't have. We're throwing those out. We're Jesus, you got me. I was like, I cannot deny this. And there was a lot of good preaching, very charismatic, and that this is what people need to be careful of. Is when you go to a church, read the Bible for yourself.
Yeah.
Okay. Read the Bible for yourself. Listen to other preachers and other teachers. When you go to a church and they say, do not listen to anybody else but me or only our approved list,
Mercy.
you might have a problem. When you go to a church and you pull into church and they do a radio station inspection in the morning to see what you're listening to on the radio, you might have a problem. Okay. When you are required to send, and this is all stuff that I lived through, when you're required to send the pastor an email every day about what you did during the day,
Whoa.
you might have a problem. Okay. Now, all of this, of course, it sounded right because scripture was taken out of context. Okay.
Right, right.
Way out of context. So you mix that with a narcissistic personality. Did you guys ever see the TV series 20 years ago, Lost?
Oh
Where
yeah.
they're on the island. Okay.
I can't
You remember Ben, the guy who was running the island, and he had this ideal community, and he was manipulating everybody around, and he was basically the one that was in control.
Uh-huh.
Okay. That's the personality that I was dealing with at the church that I was in.
Wow.
Then when it becomes the whole thing about money, yes, you do need to tithe. I do believe that. You do need to give. That it's biblical. But when all of your money is going to the pastor and his car and his insurance and his house, you might have a problem.
Right,
Okay.
right.
There was no no emphasis on developing the individuals in the church to be able to minister. It was all focused on the three individuals who were running the place. And eventually, it was so funny. I was so excited because they're like, "Hey, we are going to ordain you as a pastor in our church." I'm like, "Awesome! I'm going to get ordained." I mean, I went to seminary, and I was like, "Man, I'm not going to have to go sell hot dogs anymore on the weekend to raise money for the insurance fund." I was like, "This is
Right.
going to be great. I'm going to be a pastor. I'm going to be just like them." So I got ordained, and then they're like, "Well, because now you're a pastor, we just got elevated to the position of elder." So I found myself doing the same things I was doing, selling hot dogs, mowing lawns. I was mowing the pastor's lawn. I was like, "Where's the pastoring in any of this?"
Mercy.
And even when I
That's
would
so
attempt
crazy.
to speak into people's lives about, "Hey, you might not want to do this," I'd get a phone call like, "No, we do that. You don't." I'm like,
Wow.
okay, but that's what it was. And it was really, I tried to get out and quit several times, and I was like, but there was the fear factor, because we were always told that if you leave,
Then you lose relation.
God's going to judge you.
Hmm.
And I
Wow.
did not want that.
Did they practice excommunication too? Was that like a part of?
Yes, shunning. Yes,
Man,
exactly.
that is such uh, a red flag for a cult. So much. I'm actually watching a series right now on different cults, and like all of them have that in common. You know.
Yes,
Wow.
they do. They do. They really
Wow.
do. Yeah, the shunning, and when somebody would leave, when they choose to leave on their own, they would start rumors about them, about their sexual immorality. And I remember during pastors' meetings, we'd have those. I dreaded them. I dreaded pastors' meetings. It was like on Tuesday night. It would start at 6 o'clock, and then it would go to about 10 o'clock at night. And all it was talking about who was doing what. So it was just a gossip
Yeah.
session, is
Yeah.
all it was, to control what was going
I've
on.
seen that. I've
You know,
definitely been
I,
those
I
guys.
stepped down. I stepped down from pastoring there, and I made the mistake of staying for a few months after that.
Hmm.
And basically the straw was, some of the straws that broke the camel's back was when I'd get phone calls at maybe 8 o'clock at night on a Tuesday night saying, "Hey, we all need to meet together at so and so's house because we didn't make offering, and we're not leaving until offering is met."
Whoa.
No way.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
That's impressive.
It is,
Right.
and I went to, so, and part of why this kind of seemed right is my college education was a very strict military education
Mhm.
at the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina, where, going to somebody's room at 10:30 at night to do push-ups back in that day was normal. Okay. So I'm like, okay, well, this kind of makes sense because I'm kind of used to it. And what was interesting is a lot of the guys and girls that were in the church were either prior military, or they had graduated from the Citadel.
Ah,
So they knew this sense of honor and discipline
they
and
played to that.
everything. Yeah, and they played to that big time.
Yeah.
But I'm thankful that God set me free from that,
Sure.
that I left that. But I'm also thankful that I went through that experience, because it helped make me who I am today. And so, when it comes down to leadership, and in being a leader, just do the opposite of what they did over there. I mean, it's going to be a whole lot better. But no, it's a lot more complex than that. But I can see the telltale signs of toxicity and narcissism. I can smell it from a mile away now.
Hmm.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
you lived through it.
Yep,
Yeah.
lived
I
through it.
I
Yep.
appreciate like this part of the conversation really, just because I know that as a Christian metal group overall, we have people from all kinds of backgrounds, all kinds of religious backgrounds, and because of that, oftentimes there are clashes.
Yes.
So, and I'll say that, it's most likely that some of them might be in cults, some of them may be in mainstream denominations, some of them may be, or some of us, I'm going to say us, some of us may be in mainstream denominations posing as cults, or cults
Yes.
posing as mainstream
Yep.
denominations, should I
Hmm.
say,
Yep.
and just anything in between, so um, I guess the promotion of biblical truth for sure is essential, as we navigate through what we call Christian metal, Christian rock. Because
Yes.
there's even bands, that will write songs about their point of view or even their religion's point of view. So we've seen that a lot too. So yeah,
Yes.
these kind of
Yeah.
conversations are also important.
It's I enjoy sometimes, and sometimes I just do that when I'm looking scrolling through on the Christian metal group. Some of the some of the little spats that start like how many Christians does it take for a band to be a Christian band?
Oh god, that's probably the main one we get.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, and I'd like to talk about that for a minute. And I think that's very appropriate for the format. The format that we're in is, who cares? I mean, who really cares how many Christians it takes to make a band a Christian band? Okay, I drive a car. You drive a car.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a Christian car?
Only if it has the ichthus on it.
Okay, or my
Oh,
boss has
man,
a
yeah.
Jewish carpenter bumper sticker on the back of it
Well,
too.
I want to know how many JPMs does it take to make a song Christian? That's what.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
oh man,
Exactly.
that's a big one, man. It's a lot of people really feel like songs have to totally be. It's funny. Even among those kind of people, they still have certain criteria. Like some people, they prefer their songs to be totally evangelistic. Some
Like
people.
only listen to Disciple or Chaotic Resemblance,
Right.
which they're great and they have their place, but
Amazing bands.
they're not the only option, right?
Right. Thank
Correct.
God too, because I need something heavier. And I love them. I mean, we've interviewed both of them, and they are amazing
Yeah,
people. We've seen
for
them
sure.
live. Now, Jimmy's seen Disciple like a million times. I've seen them like 4 times, but he's
They
Not a
are
million,
amazing.
but only like
They
16.
are.
That's all.
But you all go to a job. Is the place where you work a Christian workplace?
Like, yeah. So, like, if you need a plumber, do you ask if they are a believer before you're going to hire their services, right?
Correct.
But what if they're not a believer and you need their services and God was going to use you to
exactly.
somehow, I
Exactly.
mean, you don't know, right? I mean, so
You
so to
don't.
your point though, that is a good question. How many Christians does it take? Like, if you got 5 people, do 3 of them have to be, or do all 5 of them have to be believers for it to be a Christian band? And I always go back to, okay, what is the lyrical content? Who is the songwriter? Because the way I see it, music is irrelevant. It can't. It's not good or bad. It's a tool, just like money
Yeah.
or guns or a hammer. It's a tool.
It's a
It
tool.
cannot. If it sits there on its own, it can't do anything.
Right.
The lyrics and the motivation behind the band and what they're trying to do, that makes it good or bad, in my opinion. That's how I see it.
And let's go to the Bible. I mean, that's really where we need to go to get our answers to these questions.
Mm-hmm.
All right. King Cyrus blessed Israel with all of these materials to rebuild the temple. He gave money, he gave resources, he gave people. King Cyrus was not a believer,
Okay.
he was a pagan.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. Elijah, when he was in the wilderness running from Jezebel, he was fed by, and I love this, he was fed by the ravens, the unclean bird. Okay. So we can't be so legalistic. And unfortunately, a lot of believers have missed blessings
Mm-hmm.
or turned down blessings because it didn't come from the approved Christian source. Okay.
So true.
I've been blessed by music that is not Christian. I know.
Whoa, the horror.
I enjoy music that is not Christian music. But you have to remember, all things belong to God anyway.
There you go.
Now, I am not going to go and, listen to openly satanic music. It does not settle right with my spirit.
Same.
I can't do it. However, in God, the way that He is so awesome, when somebody's singing about Satan, well, let's go down that rabbit hole a little bit. Who created Satan? Where did he come from?
Right.
There's only one creator.
There's only one creator. So if you go down that rabbit hole, you're going to wind right up back at God.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's what it comes down to. It's like you can't, that's like it says, I cannot escape, escape your presence. Even in the depths of hell, you are there. So even in the depths of the most wicked music there is, he's there because everything that's being sung about in a perverted or perverse way is something that he created to be beautiful and to be holy. That's even music that talks about or sings about sexual relations and everything like that.
I mean, look at the Song of Solomon.
Unfortunately, it's been perverted, but it's so, read the Song of Solomon. I mean, that's it in its proper context.
They didn't read that in Sunday school.
No,
I know they can't they can't phantom the fact that there's some songs in the Bible that talk about sex.
Yeah,
They say breast in the chapter. They said breast. Oh my God!
But it's there. It is.
It is. I forget which book of the Bible that it's in, but it's like, where the guys are feeling sorry for their sister because she has no breasts.
Oh.
I mean, that's biblical.
Yeah.
And you can actually preach on that. And it's like, oh, that's in the Bible, but no, you're not going to hear that. And unfortunately, what a lot of people do in the religious mindset, they just kind of glaze over that, or this is the greatest rationale that I've heard, is that, well, that's Old Testament, and that was permissible during the Old Testament, like dancing. Okay, well, David danced with all of his might, and you'll hear people say, well, that was under the Old Covenant, now we're under the New Covenant. Well, under the New Covenant, we need to be dancing a whole lot harder than David did.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's really good, and what Jay was saying, this group has over 52,000 people currently from all over the world. So we literally have atheists in the group. We have all different denominations, Catholics, you name it. I mean, they're represented in the group, and so these topics do come up, and I know people get tired of them, but from Jay and I's perspective, like, we see it all the time, and we can tell most of the time, I think, Jay, right? We can tell if somebody's being authentic with their questions.
Right, oh yeah, absolutely.
Or if they're trolling.
Yeah.
And so people get mad at the ones who are authentic with their question because there are so many trolls. So it is challenging for us to moderate that, but with there being so many unbelievers in the group too, it's definitely a ministry. I kind of, in the way I view, like, a band like Disciple, they preach to the church, and they preach to people not in the church, and I feel like our group is in that, a ministry. As Striper, I guess you could put them in there. Whoever, lots of bands, right? So that's kind of fun. But I got in a discussion with a guy last week on the Christian Metal group about how he said there is no way that the genre of black metal could be Christian.
Okay.
And it was back to the same thing. It's like, well, there are Christians who write in that style of music, and he didn't get it. He was like, absolutely not, because I guess his argument was because there are satanic bands that are black metal, and I'm like, yes, but there's also Christian bands that are in that. It's called black. You can call it whatever you want. It's just that style of music, right?
Yeah, and it's really got nothing to do with the style of music. Because people judge whether it's godly or not based upon the softness of the sound of the music or how catchy the tune is. Best example, and I know I'm going to touch a nerve with some people with this, but the best example of probably one of the most deceptive artists there is with the style and sound of music and what's going on behind the heart is Ghost.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. It's like you can oh man, this has got such a groovy beat to it. It sounds so good, and then you see what's going on. It's like, I'm not going to be rocking to that as I'm driving down the street.
I actually saw them open for Iron Maiden, and I was not impressed. I wasn't into the groovy beats. I just,
No.
I think I saw them once at the Golden Gods, which I missed, by the way. But
no.
Yeah, you familiar with the Golden Gods? The awards?
No, I don't. I'm not familiar with them.
Oh man, it's been like
I know the
decades
70s.
it's been around.
There's a 70s rock band called the Gods. They were pretty good.
Oh no, dude, the Golden Gods. I know they're Christians a lot of times, bug out about awards or whatever, but just think about Grammys for metal, and
Mm.
I think it was Metal Hammer that put it on. But yeah, that was like
Oh, okay.
it was a religious thing for me. Like I would go every year since I found out what it was. So I went like maybe 3 or 4 years in a row,
Oh,
and
nice.
so I
Where was that located at?
in LA. It's like
Okay.
it's a metal Grammy type of thing. So I literally saw a bunch. They would have like maybe 10 bands, and the bands would play 4 songs each. It would usually be like 3 songs and a cover. And for the covers, they would bring out people. So, for example, Metallica, they played 4 songs. They played 4 songs, like 3 regular ones, and then they brought out. I'm trying to think. I think it was Rob Halford that they brought out
Oh, wow.
and did a Judas Priest cover or something like that. But like I saw the Misfits reunited at the Golden Gods, like one of their first times reuniting in years. I saw like Dillinger Escape playing. I mean, it was just all kind of stuff.
Wow.
That's really cool.
That
Now
was insane.
we have the Grizzly Awards. Now there's the Christian Metal Awards. It's been going on for 3 or 4 years. That's
Oh man,
been
we gotta check that out. Like
yeah,
it was
yeah. So
we need to dive into that, man.
well, Glenn,
Yeah. What about have you done like a top 10 or a top 20 like bands of the year for your podcast?
That's something that I've been thinking about doing. With the expansion of the live stream and the podcast that we do now, I think I'm finally at the place where we can do that. And I've actually toyed around with giving a Raven Award for Raven's Heart for like the top artist of the year. So that's something that I've definitely been thinking about, and I think we could do. And I think we're finally at the place where we can
I
do
think that would be fun. Yeah.
that.
Oh yeah.
Well, man, this has been awesome. So, Glenn, tell us, where is Raven's Heart, Lithos Cry going in the future? What are you looking forward to? What you got going on? What can
I'm
the
looking
fans
forward.
expect?
Yes, I'm looking forward to seeing souls saved. I mean, that's the first
That's
thing,
awesome.
and
Yes.
people set free. We will be back on with the live stream. We're adding a few more things to our toolbox that we have on the Lithos Cry channel. We will be back with the live stream in February. We're kicking off. I forget which day it is. It's a Thursday night. I think it's the first week. We're going to be. We used to be on every Thursday night, but we're going to be scaling it back to the first and third Thursday for Raven's Heart for live. Doing that because there's a couple other tools that we want to get out there. But Firebrand is coming on with us, and I'm really excited about that in first week in February.
Great band.
Yeah, awesome, and a wonderful, wonderful guy. He's got his own podcast too, which is really cool. And then I'm going to be continuing with the Lithos Bites, really diving into Scripture, some Bible studies, and those have really taken off online. Just really diving into Scripture and into some of the prophetic with that as well. And now I'm also doing what's called an artist spotlight, where it's more like a 10 or 11 minute introduction to an artist with a little snippet of their music so people can learn who they're about. And we just did our first one with a young lady. Her name is Alessandra Clemente. She's actually her full-time music gig is she's a jazz musician in Italy, but she also does pop rock, EDM type music, and we just
Man,
interviewed
you're
her
just
a
all
couple
over the
days
board,
ago.
aren't you?
Yeah, we are, and this is the way that I look at it. And there will be another rock fest in the future too, so that will be coming. Yes, absolutely. This is the way that I look at it: is that the live stream, the website, everything that we do, it is an outreach, and it's one of the ways that we can reach out to people, to meet them, to share with them, to minister to them, to help them. Especially as artists, I have a heart towards artists that are trying to do the right thing and trying to make it in a positive way, not to be like Van Halen was in the '80s with David Lee Roth, but trying to do the right thing. And really, what it is this is what I see, is that the world of music, the way the world does it, is so greedy and so demonic. You have to play by their rules and you have to do it by their way, and they are the gatekeepers of what you hear. All right? That needs to stop. those who are believers need to take authority and have dominion over the world of music.
Yes,
Not that
sir.
everybody's going to be a Christian, it's going to be Christian music all the time, but we need to. I've seen, and this is what's grieved me, I've seen artists that have been on the verge of the truth of the gospel, and then all of a sudden there's a complete 180 and they're in witchcraft and the demonic. Okay. That hurts me. And I believe that hurts the heart of the Lord.
Absolutely.
Is that we need to have a place where artists are not exploited, they're not taken advantage of, and they're not in a place or put in a place where they have to do something that is damaging to their souls. So really, that's what I see for Lithsocry in the future, is moving even beyond this of the world of a podcast live stream, a book, a website, and a festival, to being a community where we're raising up the voice. Every one of these artists, when you talk about the prophetic, you're talking about most of the prophets were musicians in the Old Testament.
Oh, yeah.
You're talking about raising up and training the next era of prophets. And that's really what I see for this ministry. And that's where the prophetic arts were moving and growing into that more, but really having a place where they can come and encounter the Lord, be set free and saved, and understand that, wow, okay, there was power in the world, but that does not compare to when I fully die to myself and give my gifts to the Lord, how he's going to use that.
Wow.
Man, that's so good.
That's amazing. Well, here's my last question. What is your favorite thing about being a Christian?
My favorite thing about being a Christian is waking up in the morning and meeting with the Lord and seeing what it is that he's going to say, and really being able to trust Jesus for, man, I mean, the history that I have with the Lord is just, he healed me.
Yeah.
Miraculously. And that's the greatest thing. But even greater than that is he saved me and he set me free. And I'm not just being cliche about that.
Right.
He saved me. But it's being a Christian, you enter into the world of the supernatural in the right way. You enter into this relationship with God where you hear him. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that it's an audible voice in my head and I need psychological evaluation, but you hear him. You see what he's doing.
Yeah.
You're able to perceive. You're able to relate to people. You're able to understand people. And then you start to see Jesus in other people that have been born again, and then seeing the gifts that other people have. It's just every day as a Christian is exciting.
Mm-hmm.
It's really exciting. God speaks to me very clearly in dreams. I mean, I love going to bed at night wondering what it is the Lord's going to reveal and speak at night. It's just really cool to see him make ways where there is no way. It's just it's about Jesus. That's what's exciting, and getting to know him more. And the more I die to me, the more fun it gets.
Mm-hmm. I love it.
That's good. That's good. So, what can the Christian metal community do to support Lithsocry Ministries?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for asking that question. First of all, go to Lithsocry on the YouTube page, Lithoscry on YouTube. Go ahead, watch our videos, leave comments, interact. That's how we beat the algorithm on everything. Go ahead and subscribe. And when we do the live streams, we put out announcements. Join the live stream. Join in the conversation. Not everybody that comments we agree with, and it's great. It's great discourse. And then, of course, go ahead to lithoscry.com, and there's a link to purchase the book Stones That Cry, God's Precious Metal, on Amazon. So you can go ahead and do that, and that's many ways that we can be supported. But please help us support those artists that we are promoting, that need to have a voice in this time that we're living in. Go ahead and like their stuff, subscribe, do all the good stuff.
Right. Cool. Love it.
That's awesome. I've definitely discovered some new artists that I was not familiar with by listening to it as well. So,
Right.
Very good. Well, awesome. Well, we appreciate you being on, and we hope
Thank
you have a
you.
great week. And we'll definitely get out there and promote this some more to people.
True.
Thank you. I
Bless
appreciate
you.
you guys. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Jimmy.
And God bless you, brother, for sure.
Bless you too.